I'll start over here. Maybe with this man standing up right here. Just introduce yourself. You're already standing.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Robert Wesley, the public defender. Thanks. I haven't opened my mail yet this morning. Might be something from the governor.
Anyone else? Judge?
I'm now in my 14th year as a legal.
Okay. Oh. And Deirdre? Deirdre is right here, McNabb. Everybody knows her, former state president. Former superintendent of the year, etc. Nice to see you, Deirdre.
Thank you, Lisa.
Welcome. Anyone else? Anybody? Well, we have a couple of groups we want to welcome today. And first I'd like to welcome, we have some students from the Montessori at Roseboro Adolescent Center who are here today as our guests. They are reading Devil in the Grove at the moment and specifically reached out to us to be in this program, and we're delighted that they were able to join us. Now I'm going to turn it over to Charlie Williams, who has some other introductions to make.
Thank you, Lisa. And you all are 180 people today. That's a sellout for the League of Women Voters, so congratulations. And I want to take the opportunity to thank the A-Team for Hot Topics, Andrea Coburn and Ann Helmuth. It's, running a Hot Topics, it's like being a showrunner for an HBO series that goes on and on and on. It is a heavy lifting job, but thank you both, because for the last 10 years, it has been fantastic. And this particular program is a real dream come true. I want to just take 3 minutes and tie this into a bigger national project that's going on that I think a lot of you are already familiar with. The project with the Equal Justice Initiative, or EJI, out of Montgomery. If you've been up to Montgomery recently and you've seen the memorial that they just opened, raise your hand. Quite a few, quite a few. You know what that experience is like. And for those of you who haven't been, it is worth the trip. So worth the trip. There are 4 different museums, and Selma's just an hour and 20 minutes away. But what they are doing at the EJI, one of the many things they're doing, is documenting over 4,000 lynchings that happened throughout the South over a 70-year period from 1877 to 1950. Some of these are known, many of them have never been documented and are not known. And this report, the biggest surprise is Orange County, Florida ranks number 6 in the whole nation across the South in the most number of lynchings. A large number of that due to the Ocoee incident, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. We are in the process, we have a task force that I'm going to introduce in a minute, all volunteer, of documenting the storyline about the July Perry incident, which we'll talk about, and we are getting ready to unveil a marker in his honor, EJA marker. It'll be the second one in Florida in just a couple of months. And then for those of you who've been up to Montgomery and you've seen the columns hanging from the ceiling, part of our job is to bring that column home to our county, and that will happen a little bit later. So right now, let me ask all volunteer members of the Truth and Justice Project to please stand. There are 2 tables here. Let's give them a round of applause. And I invite you to drop by their table when lunch is over and grab one of these calendars from EJI. It's free. On the last page is a picture from our group collecting soil from the neighborhood in honor of July Perry. So they're wonderful calendars. Be sure and grab one and be our guest to take one home. I wanted to introduce Dr. Connie Lester from UCF. Connie, can you stand? Connie is with the History Department and is running the Riches program, which every league member ought to get to be familiar with. At the back is a bookmark which will guide you to the program, but it is a deep dive on all things Central Florida. So Connie, thank you. She's a new partner with our effort. And many of you know Rachel Allen with Peace and Justice Institute. Rachel, just stand. She's been giving us a hand on this effort. And sitting next to Rachel, I'd like to introduce Mike Hine, who's City Manager, City of Groveland. Mike, if you could stand. Work continues to go on with Groveland, so we're glad to lend a hand. Last issue, there's a flyer on your table about a great event coming up in a couple weeks, March 7th at First Unitarian Church. We'll be showing a 60-minute documentary film called The Yard. The story is about discovery of a slave market site in a parking lot behind a church in Memphis. And the filmmaker will be here along with the director of our counterpart group from Memphis. We'll have the film and a panel discussion. Memphis is doing great things. Is anybody here from Memphis or Shelby County, Tennessee? Raise your hand. Shelby County has one of the highest rates of lynchings, again, in the South. And they've been doing great work identifying the details of the story. So join us, take the flyer, and please bring some friends. So with that, I'll say thank you and turn it back over.
Thank you, Charlie. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the program today, Senior Ninth Judicial Circuit Judge Emerson Thompson Jr. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank the League for inviting us to be here. Let me do this. We're going to make sure that the panel members have enough time to speak. And I just want to do a couple of things to set the stage for you. How many of you were born and raised in Florida? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have spent the majority of your life in Orange County, Florida? And when was the first time that you heard about the riots in Ocoee, Florida? When you were a kid or an adult? Okay. All right, let me give you some information, just brief factoids, which I love. When I teach Sunday school, I like to set the scene by giving factoids. The riot in Ocoee started because of voting. It involved Mose Norman and Junius July Perry in November 2nd and 3rd of 1920. The population of Florida at the time, the total population, was 968,470 people. State of Florida. The population of Orange County was 19,890, and that's from the U.S. Census. Florida is thought of a very nice place, visitors, tourism. In 1920, citrus was king. Also, they had a workforce made primarily of blacks, poor whites, and minorities. Florida, between 1880 and 1968, was ranked 5th on the list of lynchings in the United States of America. Florida had the highest percentage per capita of lynchings in the U.S. Of the 25 counties during that period of time with the most lynchings, Florida had 6 counties: Orange 34, Marion 30, Polk 19, Columbia 17, and Taylor County 17. Factoid or guess, how many of you know where Taylor County is? All right, how many of you know where Columbia County is? Bob West doesn't count. He's been in most counties in the state of Florida. The point I make is Florida was very rural, very sparsely populated, and lynching was used as a method of controlling the population. Most people think that black men were lynched because of white women. That's true, but also because of theft and what my granddad used to call being uppity. Asking to vote, refusing to comply with the directions from white men such as step into the street so we can walk past, and other things like that. Black men were more at risk of being lynched in Florida than any other state in the Union. And it continued until, for example, the death of Harriet and Harry Moore whose house was bombed on Christmas Day because of their active interest in registering people to vote. So with that as a background, the panel members, I'd like them to come up and allow them to introduce themselves and give 3 minutes of an introduction, and we'll start with the program. Thank you so very much. I'd like the members of the panel to introduce themselves and tell you why they're here and the significance Ocoee has to them. We'll start with Commissioner Oliver.
Good morning. My name is Commissioner George Oliver. I am a city commissioner with the city of Ocoee, Florida. I am the first African American commissioner in the history of the city of Ocoee. When I make that type of announcement, the thing that always comes to mind for me is I didn't do it myself, the voters of the city of Ocoee, which makes me proud to be a commissioner in the city of Ocoee, that they were the ones that made the decision to come out and vote for that change. So when I hear that round of applause, I always think about the citizens in Ocoee. They're the true ones, the true heroes that came out and deserve those round of applauses every time I make that announcement. So I always recognize the citizens of Ocoee when I make that announcement. But I'm here, I'm honored to be here before you today to sit on this panel, this distinguished panel, and talk about the city of Ocoee, to talk about the riots, to talk about what that means to me, what it means to the city of Ocoee and the citizens of Ocoee. What brought me here to Ocoee was the fact that back in 1997, my family and I decided to move from Jacksonville, Florida to here as I got out of the military. And we started looking for places to live. We stayed in Richmond Heights for a couple of years in Ocoee, in Orlando. And as my family grew, we decided to move to larger spaces. And Ocoee seemed to be a city that was on the move, it was growing, and we really just loved the landscape of Ocoee. We also liked the logo. It was called the Center for Good Living. And that was one of the reasons that we chose Ocoee. But we also heard about the riots, and the information that we got about it came from one of our relatives, and it gave us a little pause. But my wife, she came to me and said, you know what, if we don't move to Ocoee, we'll never be a part of the change. She said, so in order for us to be a part of that change, we have to move to Ocoee. And as you can see now, we have actually deeply ingrained into the change of Ocoee.
Thank you. Tell us about yourself and how Ocoee is important in your life.
Good morning. Praise God, who is the strength and the redeemer of my life. Good morning, all.
Good morning.
I would like to thank the League of Women Voters of Orange County and the city of Ocoee for allowing me the opportunity to share my story of Julius July Perry. But before I do, please allow me to introduce my daughter, who is here with me today, Salia George. Thank you. Salia and my deceased son, Austin McWhite, are the fourth generation of Mr. Julius July Perry. My name is Sharon Cooley McWhite. I am the great niece of the late Julius July Perry. July Perry was the youngest of three brothers, Thomas, Andrew, and July. The late Thomas Perry was the eldest brother and my great-grandfather. I recall the story of the brothers from my great-aunt Vashti Perry McCoy. She was the daughter of Thomas and other relatives who remembered the Perry's journey and the tragic demise of Uncle July. They left South Carolina to Florida in the 1800s, seeking a better way of life. To avoid contact with the Ku Klux Klan and other hateful people, they walked along the railroad. Unfortunately, the family matriarch, Uncle July's mother, my great-great maternal grandmother, passed along the way. Initially, the Perry family settled in a small town east of Tallahassee, Florida. Of the three sons, Thomas and Andrew settled in Lake City, Florida. Judge, that is Columbia County, and that is my hometown. Uncle Julius July Perry ventured south, settling in Ocoee, Florida. Mr. Oliver. Thomas and Andrew became farmers and craftsmen in Lake City. Uncle July was a producer, working in the orange groves, and later became a prosperous landowner and an African-American advocate. Auntie Vashti recalled a knock on the door late one evening, and the news came of Uncle July's death. This, of course, devastated the family. It was 11 days after Uncle July's death that law enforcement told my great-grandfather Thomas Perry that his brother was dead. They did not tell him how he died, only that he was dead. Thomas was not to go to Ocoee because of the unrest of violence. It was later discovered that Uncle July Perry was lynched. He was lynched because he was encouraging other blacks to vote. Historically, this was the first election in which women were allowed to vote. We realize we cannot change what took place in the actions of those responsible 98 years ago. However, one of the first steps to healing and the grieving process is acknowledging. On behalf of all the generations past, present, and those yet to be born of the late Julius July Perry, I humbly offer appreciation for the city of Ocoee's acknowledgement of the wrong and injustice that resulted in the loss of July Perry's life. We thank the city of Ocoee for its issuance of a formal apology and a proclamation on November 20th, 2018. In closing, Uncle July Perry gave his life so I could vote, so his descendants could vote, so people who look like me could vote. Now on this day, I encourage each of you to become registered voters. So in ending, let me share with you why I vote. So why I vote? As I reflect, allow me to tell you. Medgar Evers, field secretary of the NAACP, was murdered by a KKK member for his efforts to register voters in Mississippi. I vote because of him. Michael Swerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman were murdered in Mississippi by the KKK for registering people to vote. I vote for them. Susan B. Anthony was arrested and convicted for voting illegally because women could not vote. I vote for her. Reverend George Lee of Belzoni, Mississippi was murdered for getting people to vote. I vote for him. Lamar Smith was shot dead on the courthouse lawn in Brookhaven, Mississippi for organizing voters registration. I vote for him. Emmett Till, a 14-year-old vacationing from Chicago, was reported flirting with a white woman in the store in Money, Mississippi. 3 nights later, 2 men took him from his bed, beat him to death, and dumped his body in the Tallahatchie River. I vote for him. Harriet and Harry Moore, residents of Brevard County, organized the first branch of NAACP in Brevard County. They registered thousands to the state to vote. On Christmas Day, 1951, on their 25th wedding anniversary, their house was bombed and they were killed. I voted for them. And finally, my great uncle, Julius July Perry, a prominent landowner, was lynched November 1920 because he tried to get others to vote in Ocoee. I voted for him. I am determined to have a voice. I vote for myself to make life for me and others. The only vote I have is my voice. I challenge to register voters. I challenge you to register voters and vote so your voice will be loud and your voice will be clear and your voice will be heard.
Thank you
I,
very much.
Sharon Cooley McWhite, stand with the League of Women Voters of Orange County and encourage each of you the initiative to register to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and I am so appreciative and grateful for the invitation here today to be among you. It's like deja vu for me for the past 20 years as I have been involved with Democracy Forum. I am a native of Apopka, still live in the city of Apopka. I would like to acknowledge one of our founders of Democracy Forum, Mr. Curtis Michelson. Would you please stand? +20 years ago, I was invited to attend a meeting at the urging of a friend of mine. Diane always take the alternate route, which was Fuller Crossing Road, which went around the northeastern quadrant of Ocoee. When we would be on the school bus, we would scoot down and the bus driver would say, "Be quiet." But little did I know why I had to be quiet. I just thought because, blacks just was not allowed. I did not know at that time people had lost their lives. It was not until I joined Democracy Forum in 1997 that we were engaged in a very extensive research project. Many people ask the question, why so long? Well, people in my community had kept quiet forever and ever. One of our residents was a refugee from Ocoee by the name of John Hickey. The Hickey family owned 120 acres at the time before the riot. The Hickey sought refuge in Apopka and he lived his life out, John and Lucy Hickey. When I joined the group, we went on this mission to uncover something that people had been silent forever about. And that silence, as it began to break, people began to talk. We began to reach out to descendants. The question was, what happened to more than 200+ black people in the city of Ocoee? Curtis and myself ventured to the University of North Florida in Jacksonville to delve into the NAACP's anti-lynching investigative files. There we found documents, and one letter in particular that was written by Mrs. Janie Hamilton. Her son, Jack Hamilton, was a member of our group who had been researching, trying to find out where was the family's property in Ocoee. That letter was smuggled out in a crate of citrus. And it's so beautiful how she starts out explaining about the different citrus that is being shipped and that she was going to get it out earlier, but she drops down in the second, third paragraph, and she says, something wicked has happened or is happening here in Ocoee. And from that point on, with that information, we left University of North Florida and we went to the Vital Statistics Office looking for the death certificate of July Perry. I pretended to be a relative of his, and I needed his, my uncle or whatever I said at that time. I would like to have a copy of his death certificate. So lo and behold, we get the death certificate. And so I said to Curtis, Curtis, we'll never find this cemetery. I said, this is probably some overgrown place somewhere in Central Florida. We would never find it. And one day I get a call from Curtis, and he says, guess what, Fran? I found July. I'm like, you're kidding me. And he says, he's buried downtown Orlando. I'm like, oh no. We had the map, we had the card from the cemetery. So this all started, and I would like for you, if you would, for me, just for a moment of silence, to honor the person who is the reason for your being here today, that set off this movement of research by the Democracy Forum, a gentleman by the name of Otis McCaster. Otis had accepted a job in Ocoee as a radio announcer. Otis worked all but 3 nights in Ocoee. And I met Otis here a few months ago. And Otis is deceased now. He died a couple of months ago. But I was able to speak with him. And Otis says that his 3 nights of terror, he called it, he was followed into the radio station 3 nights by police. Police get out the car and come and sit and wait till his shift ended. And he said that he began to feel what he said, paranoia is a state of heightened fear. And he said that this was not a place for a brother. So he did not return to that job. So when he caught up with Curtis again, he probably, I guess he was like ready to cut Curtis' head off for sending him over there in the woods, in the dark, for a job. And so Curtis began to ask questions as to why, black men don't want to go to Ocoee. And with Otis' story, we set out to do an extensive research project. There were about 30 people in our group, and in that group, everybody had an assignment. We met every week for several months or more. Then we unveiled our research in 1998 at Borders Books, where we were met with people who were not too happy about unveiling this research, and that we were considered outsiders to that community. We had no business being there. So if you would join me in just a moment of silence for Otis McCaster. Thank you.
We want to thank the panel members for their informed presentation and their passionate presentation. Question, how many of you learned something today that you did not know about the Ocoee riot? All right, looking around the room and looking at the hands up. All right, let's now just ask the panel members some questions, and we want to make sure we give the audience time to participate. We know about Commissioner Oliver and how he came to be in Ocoee, and we learned about your interest in Ocoee. Did you know any persons who, after you started your research, that you'd known for a while, you found out that they had relatives or they had kinfolk who lived in Ocoee? Ms. Boyd?
Yes, I knew the Hickey family all my life. They're a very large family, but no one in that family ever discussed, as well as I knew the Franks family. Alan Franks was July Perry's nephew, and at the time, Alan Franks fled to Plymouth, Florida. That's where he died in the mid-late 90s. And he had shared his story with Lester Dabb, who was the former mayor of Ocoee, who was a white man on a black man cause. I have to admire Lester Dabb so much. He did his master's thesis, and he interviewed people like Alan Franks. So I knew families, but nobody ever talked about what happened.
How did you first find out about your grand uncle, and how old were you at that time, and did he go into details, or your family members, about his life?
As a child growing up in a small town, Columbia County, Lake City, Florida, vast majority of my family is the Perry family. And on Sundays, the Thomas brothers, the Perry brothers, actually built our church, Mount Olivet Baptist Church in Lake City, which is still standing today. And it was known that every Sunday after dinner, we would go over to our grandparents and visit. And the Perry family was full of love, laughter, and always shared memories and historical moments. And that's when we always talked about Uncle July and his brothers and the lynching process. So that's actually when I first learned about my Uncle July and the situation that happened as a resident, him being a resident of Ocoee, Florida.
And you live in Lake City now?
No, sir. I am a resident of Orange County, Orlando, Florida.
Thank you. And how did you find out, Commissioner, about the riot, not about the fact that there may be perceived racial insensitivity towards blacks by the community, but how did you find out about the riots?
Well, as I stated before, when I got out of the military I got in 1994, my family and I moved to Jacksonville, Florida. I went to work for NFL franchise. And I was recruited by Microsoft to come to Central Florida to work in Central Florida. And as my family started to grow, we needed a place to stay, actually a larger home. And Ocoee was actually the top of our list. And when we decided that we wanted to move to Ocoee, we started reaching out to our relatives to let them know we're going to be moving to Ocoee within the next 6 months or so. One of the relatives is my wife's uncle, Uncle Joe Holly. He's actually from Central Florida, and he actually his family lived in Ocoee. And as a child, I think he was maybe 2 or 3 years old, he lived with his family in Ocoee. And he emphatically told us that he would not visit me in Ocoee. He never spoke about Ocoee at all. We never knew anything about the riots. We never knew he even lived in Ocoee. We always thought he lived in Orlando, Florida. So when he told us that he would not come to visit us, I naturally wanted to know why. Why won't you come to visit me in Ocoee? And that's when he proceeded to tell me the story about his uncle, his dad, and his family being ran out of Ocoee due to the riots in 1920. And it took, after we moved to Ocoee in 2000, it took another 2 years for him to actually come and visit me in Ocoee. And I had to show him around and show him the changes that was being made in the city. And he stopped for a minute and he wept. And he just could not believe the changes that had been made. He could not believe how diverse the city had become, because he had never stepped foot in Ocoee from the time he was maybe 3 or 4 years old after that incident. But I heard about it through Uncle Joe Holly, Joe Holly Sr. And it left a lasting impression on him to come back at the age of, I think he was about 86, 87 at the time. And to see Ocoee, to see how far we had come as a community. And he passed away a few years ago. But again, the conversation I had with him after he passed away, or before he passed, was that to be a part of a change. He said, continue to stay there and be a part of the change that I saw a few years ago.
Do any of you have close friends in Ocoee now that you visit? Not the commissioner, but Ms. Boykin.
I have cousins. I have a sister who lives there, and they told me they were moving over there. I'm like, really? Hey, all right. You haven't read your history. And I was just, at that time, learning about all the details of pretty much what took place. Yeah, I have relatives and friends whom I visit often, and I check in on them, make sure everything's okay.
What about you? You had your family roots go back to Ocoee. Do you have kinfolk, relatives, or friends who live now in Ocoee?
Yes, I do, and I must say that I was on the campaign trail for Mr. George Oliver and pounding the pavement, and he is the first. Give it up, give it up, give it up. To receive an office in the city of Ocoee, so I'm just proud to be a part of that historical moment. So yes, I do.
Since we have you and you made such an impassioned presentation, what are the parallels between July Perry voting and Do you see any in America today?
Yes, indeed, I do. With the Trayvon Martin case, racial profile, a young man walking to 7-Eleven just to get a bag of Skittles and iced tea, and he was killed due to no fault of his own. And they have stated that it was in self-defense. And to just know that you can go out and just kill someone and feel that there's a right and that it's okay to do that, necessarily unso. That's why it's so important that we do stand together, that we unite together, and we come together, because just like it happened to him and my uncle, it can happen to any one of us. So we must realize the importance of humanity for all mankind, and we must take a stand. And we need to be a part of the change. It's time for change. Please be a part of the change.
Commissioner, as an elected official, what parallels do you see as far as voting and suppression of voting?
I was kind of hoping you weren't going to ask me that question.
You don't have to answer.
You know, being on the inside, looking at it from this perspective, I often ask myself a few questions. Why is it that when it comes time for an election in a small municipality of Ocoee, why do we have elections during off years as opposed to doing primaries or general elections when most people vote? So I have to ask myself questions like that. I have to ask myself questions as to why is it only 5 days to qualify as a candidate, and 2 of those days is a weekend? I ask myself those questions. I have to ask myself, why do most of the politicians or elected officials in the city of Ocoee have been there for 15, 20 to 30 years plus, going unchallenged? I ask myself those questions. And finally, I ask myself, why is the election cycle only 50 days and sometimes only 40 days? So I think about those questions, and the only answer that I can ever come up with is the fact that it's systematic. It's systematic where you have a system that's been put in place that is very agenda-driven, and you have the leadership that looks the same for 100 years. It looks the same for 100 years. The ideology of the leadership is the same. It's always been the same. So when someone comes to challenge the status quo, then they fight to keep things the same. So I see voter suppression when it comes time to vote, when you can't get a early precinct open in the city. You have to go all the way downtown to vote. Where you can't go to your local library to vote. You have to go all the way downtown. Who's making those decisions? You have to ask yourself, who's making those decisions? The current leadership is how you protect the ideology. It's how you protect the ideas of Jim Crow. Jim Crow is live and well. It still lives right now today. It lives in the boardrooms. It lives in the conference rooms. It lives in the White House. It lives in City Hall. It is still alive and well. The idea. We've come a long ways, but we still have a long way to go. We've seen the light of justice push back segregation and ideology of Jim Crow, push it back in the dark corners of history, but they're still alive and well today. And it is up to us to bring light, truth, and justice to those that harness the ideas of Jim Crow, those that harness ideas of voter suppression, those that ideas of want to keep things the same. It is up to us to shed light onto those situations.
Thank you very much. We're going to start questioning now, but let me, I asked them how did they find out about Ocoee. When I was a young lawyer with Don Lichterback and Al Rung at the state attorney's office in 74, 75, one of my friends, Al Rung's father, wrote a book called Murder of a Little Girl. I'm sure some of you are old enough to remember the murder of Camellia Johann that occurred in Ocoee, and he talks about the investigation by Bob Deegan, Jack Bachman, and investigator Overman. But I read this and read over it until I got assigned to Ocoee as my first job in 1976. And this is what I read and read over and paid no attention to it. Until April 10th, 1969, not much of significance happened in Ocoee except the nigger riot of 1919. It's half a century since then. Few of the men who proved to Negro Mose Norman that he was not going to vote are still alive. Within the tales of that event, a lot of fantasy has been flavored into fact and have come down to the present in fanciful stories about the riot. But it is pure fact that no blacks live in Ocoee today, nor will they be caught within its city limits after dark any day. And that was what I read in 1974, 75. I'll tell you a quick story. When I became a judge in 1976, my first assignment was in Ocoee, Florida, on Story Road, in the county office building, county service building. The county judges would rotate. We do Winter Garden, Ocoee, Apopka, Winter Park, and then trials in Orlando on Friday. So when I got appointed, the judge before me, Lyon Cornelius, became a circuit judge. I was a county judge, and I was going to Ocoee. The chief judge called me in and said, well, I've talked to people that it may not be a good idea for you to go to Ocoee. And I said, well, let me ask the question. Who's running the court system, you or the people on the phone? And what is my position going to be with my colleagues when the new guy, and at that time it was all guys, all went to what we used to call the satellite courthouses, and we rolled the circuit. So one of them will have to take my place while I get a cushier job, and they're not going to be happy. So I went to Ocoee, and one of my church members, when I told her, or they found out, looked at me and shared her story. And I found out later several of my church members had ties to Ocoee, but never ever talked about it. Right. To the day they died, they never talked about it, except to me and some others. So the legacy, even until the 60s and 70s, still existed. And at the time I went to Ocoee, there were no black residents, and the first black officer in Ocoee had a cross burned on his yard in the late 70s. Questions from board, from members only. You have to be a member in order to ask a question, and they will take your money now. Go to the back. The ubiquitous Honorable Judge LeBlanc will hold the mic while you ask your short question with no prejudice.